Welcome to the Triage Method podcast with me, Gary McGowan, and my co-host, Mr. Patrick Farrell. This week, we're going to be answering a question that has been very common over the last couple of months, at least in my client base. Maybe I'm just doing something terribly wrong,
That's
but that
probably
is,
likely.
no, in all seriousness, it's been a question that's come up among people that I've been coaching who started to take up a bit more running, as well as some individuals in our Facebook group and people through the Triage DMs. And that question is basically, hello, I've been taking up running recently and I've had knee pain. What do I do, basically? So how to work around, get through, cure, you could say, knee pain associated with running, particularly for someone who is new to running. And the reason that is worth considering is because when people first take up running, and they do have the onset of knee pain, their immediate assumption is that there's something that they're doing that's just inherently wrong, or that they're not built for running. So the first assumption could be, right, my running mechanics are just bad, or my running shoes are the problem, and maybe it's because I'm running on the roads and I need to change all those variables. And the difficult thing about that is that if you only have that approach to managing knee pain associated with running, then you essentially create barriers between you and the activity. Because if the roads are the problem, okay, now you're just not going to run on a road for the rest of your life. It's not a great setup. If it's the shoes that are the problem, then now you have to spend money to buy the perfect pair of shoes. And how do you know that those ones will even work for you? And then if it's just your running mechanics that are the problem, sure, there are some things that you can adjust, and try to use some cues. And, sometimes there's very obvious things that people could improve on. But a lot of the time you just have to accept that people run differently. We're all not that there isn't a spectrum and that many people aren't the same, but a lot of us do run differently, and you will see different types of people. Like for me, if I run, you'll see my feet externally rotate. You'll see quite a lot of inversion in my foot, and that might be very different to someone who runs like real military style. Everything, and that would be very different between me and that individual. However, if anyone looks at my kind of resting structure and you analyze my anatomy, you'd see, oh, it actually makes sense why this guy's run would look that way, because it seems to be that he's just got a lot of external rotation at the knee and blah blah blah. The point there being that, look, we have anatomical variation that's normal, and that doesn't predetermine you to be set for just having pain when you do a certain activity, or you being just basically not built for a certain activity. So with all that said, where do we go from here? And where do we go from here is essentially adopting an approach of well, basically to use kind of Greg Lehman's terminology, who's a guy that I look up to, using that kind of movement optimism approach. And movement optimism, like basically being related to, right, regardless of how you are built, we can probably structure the activity in such a way that you can absolutely do that activity, and we just need to build up your capacity and your tolerance for that activity over time. So rather than looking at people's structures and saying that, all right, that's just not for you, you can't do that, you're not built for that, you're going to get injured if you do that, we say, how can I prepare you to be able to do the things that you want to do? And that's kind of your central philosophy. Now, that doesn't mean that we can make someone with really short femurs and a long torso squat the exact same as someone who has really long femurs and is 6'5". That's those people don't really exist these days, and they're
I'm
kind
getting
of
called out here.
weirdos. But
You're all
but yeah.
subhuman, below 6'4", subhuman.
But essentially, what I'm saying is that we should expect that the outcome will still be different. The outcome is going to be the outcome of how their run looks or their squat looks is going to be the same. So as a result, it makes sense to basically not have specific idealistic standards as to how running should look, because running can look many different ways, and all you have to do to start to realize that is just look across the spectrum of elite runners, whether they be sprinters, whether they be marathon runners. Sure, you'll see plenty of people who have maybe the ideal mechanics for the activity, but you'll also see many people who totally just don't adhere to that at all. Hussein Bolt is obviously the example that I brought up many times in the podcast before, where Hussein Bolt has a leg length discrepancy. And if you look at the way he runs and when you analyze it biomechanically, he actually has, very uneven force distribution between his left and his right leg. And if you look at other marathon runners and you look at the amount of hip extension that they have, or where do they strike their foot when they fall, you see great. So point here being, look, if these people are getting away with it on the elite stage with very high volumes of running, of course, there could be an element of survivorship bias, but it is also the case that it's very unlikely that you starting up a new activity, you're someone who just took up running, it's very unlikely you need to worry about all these specifics of being absolutely perfectly built and prepared for the activity. Rather, it's more so just a case of building up tolerance gradually over time and introducing the activity in a smart way.
Like
So,
this is
yeah,
something that people kind of do. They always put it off. They're like, "Oh, I'm just not built
yeah.
for running. I'm just not built to run." And it's like, of course you're not built to run because you haven't elicited any of those adaptations
Yeah.
because you've never run.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And it is one of those things where, like, I think running more so than with a lot of activities, people just kind of accept, I am just not built for that. And to be fair, there are people write books on this stuff, and there are lots of people who really do play guru in terms of saying, oh, we're just not built to run, and some people just should never run. And then you'll see buzzword articles, with clickbait saying why humans should never run, why this one activity is so bad for your joints and stuff like that. But in general, look, adopting that kind of movement optimism philosophy of, look, if you want to do something, we can build you up towards it and prepare you for it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be as good as some other individuals at it, or that potentially you won't have a higher risk of injury, because I'm sure, there are definitely factors that could increase your risk versus someone else. But basically, yeah, you can do the thing. You can do the thing. So with that said, right, from a proactive perspective, because I don't want to just say, right, you already have knee pain. I also want to say, right, someone who wants to kind of prevent the onset of knee pain or other problems when they take up running, the first thing to do is of course, like, follow the advice that we have discussed. I believe we have a podcast, a longer form podcast on this kind of good running principles for beginners, and I've got a coffee with Gaz on it on the YouTube as well. But like this, the simple principles are to start small and to build up, and is in the exact same way that we discuss weight training. When we discuss weight training, we discuss things like volume and intensity and frequency, and it's the exact same thing here. So from a volume perspective, the total amount of time or kilometers that you're running, start small with that. From the intensity perspective, how close it is to your max, like, this is probably the one of the main flaws, I think, that people do fall for when they take up running, is that their immediate assumption is, I need to run as fast as I can for as long as I can. Like, that's kind of their goal, because it is kind of like when you get into weight training, you want to see how many reps you can do, and in a running context, you want to see how fast you can go. There was a trend going around, obviously, at the beginning of I think it was for charity, to be fair, but at the beginning of the lockdown, everyone was trying to see how fast they could do their 5K, and everyone was trying to beat each other, and plenty of people were cheating on Strava. But basically, the intent there was like, I've never run, or maybe I just played GAA, but now I'm going to do my fastest 5K that I possibly can. And if you're going out and taking that approach towards running, you're definitely at a higher risk, higher probability of injury than someone who's real smart about kind of building up slowly over time. So this is something that I do find difficult to introduce to people, because people have been so used to that approach. So when you first kind of tell people to do something like monitor their heart rate, that's one way you can do it. It's actually a lot easier to do that these days, to be fair. I used to be like, oh no, only if you have access to it. But most people, or a lot of the people that tend to come to us for coaching, at least, a lot of people do have activity watches and stuff like that. It doesn't mean you need to have a heart rate monitor, like a polar strap. But if you do have a watch, you can begin to track these things. And if what you're seeing is that throughout your run, you're hitting like 170, 180, 190 beats per minute. And that's like, feeling also really intense, and you're absolutely gasping for air throughout, then it would make sense why you were so fatigued after running, and potentially why you would be at higher risk of injury, and why you don't like the activity if you're constantly going 100%. So rather than adopting that approach, if you can take the approach of, right, let's try to aim for 60 to 70% or 60 to 80% of your maximum heart rate roughly to start off with. Like what I generally say to people is like, let's kind of see you more or less in the 130 to 150 range for your run. You know, let's do 20 minutes at that pace and see how you go. And then if you can do that, then you have an introductory level. You can say, okay, I know that when I run at a 6 minutes 30 seconds per kilometer pace, that I am reaching 145 beats per minute on average. Now you have an idea of where your fitness lies on that spectrum of intensity and the actual pacing outcomes. And then what you can do is start to build a program, because again, you don't want to just go as fast as possible. So that's what I would say to you, would be to introduce that gradual pacing guideline of having some sort of intensity guidelines in place. In this case, it could be heart rate, or it could be just RPE, so rate of perceived exertion. So what I generally say to people is, you know, let's start off with somewhere around an RPE of 7. And a very simple way of thinking about that is that it's about a 7 out of 10 if you were to rate it. And even simpler again, somewhere around your conversational pace. So that if I was running alongside you and we were trying to have a bit of a conversation, that we could hold a bit of a conversation, you know, but if I was to try and sing a song, I couldn't sing a song, but I'm able to speak sentences. You know, you don't want to be at the point where you're so out of breath that you can't even finish your sentences, you know, that you don't want to be at that level of intensity. However, that's often the case when people do first take up running. So there's some simple guidelines when you are starting to take it up. And obviously from an actual volume perspective and a frequency perspective, don't say, like, I actually had a client who did this recently. She was doing a challenge and she did 10Ks in a row. Like a year ago, a 10K was like would have been an achievement, like, you know, but yeah, there you go. Don't do that sort of stuff. You know, I had warned her in advance. I was like, look, it's probably not the smartest approach. And look, once you're kind of, you understand that, go ahead. But she went ahead and did it anyway. But in terms of the actual volume itself, don't go out and do that. Don't look at things in the way that we do weight training. You know, when we think about weight training, we see 60 kilos, we see 100 kilos, we see 140 kilos, depending on your level of strength. We basically see the weights that we use and the intensities that we use in basically the plates that are available in the gym. So we allow our intensity to be dictated by plate availability and how they look on the bar, rather than trying to be a little bit more objective. And the same thing happens with running, because people look at distance and they say, why would I run a 3K? Why would I run a 4K? Why would I run a 4.7K? I'm going to run a 5K. You know, it's like I'm going to run a 5K, I'm going to run a 10K, and then I'm going to do a 20K or a half marathon. Like they're the kind of units that people view the world through. Whereas if you can actually start and say, you know what, week 1, I'm actually just going to do 1K. Boom, done, right? It's not a big, massive workout. Maybe you might want to come home and do some skipping, or you want to do some burpees or some push-ups or whatever you're doing afterwards. But you start off with that 1K and then you build it up and you say, all right, I'm going to do 2K, I'm going to do 3K, etc. And you build that up as the weeks go on, and you kind of spread it out nicely across the week. So rather than say I'm going to do 7 sessions, or I'm going to do all my weekly running volume in one session, you might say I'm going to do 3 sessions, 1 to 2K to start off with, and then I'm going to build up as the weeks go on. So that's a real simple introductory point. So there are kind of some good heuristics. But then, excuse me, then as you begin to actually, or as we look at this through the perspective of someone who already has pain, so you've actually had some sort of knee pain, you've been through the running process, you've done something, basically what you want to do then is kind of just reverse back and work through those principles. That's most often what I do with people. Is someone will say, you know, this has happened with a good few clients recently, because they've taken up new activities, or they've been doing some stuff alongside our programming and stuff like that. And basically what they found is, you know, all right, Gary, my knee, not in great shape, you know, took up a bit of GA there on the side with some of the lads. And look, we did these mad workouts and now my knee's at me, you know, that kind of thing. So what I would say to people then is, right, that's absolutely fine. And I have some very simple heuristics in there, right? Let's first start by pulling back the volume, right? Let's pull back the total amount of work that you do. Let's pull back the intensity of that work. And then let's gradually reintroduce that work over time. Like, it sounds so simple. It's almost insulting to have done a 4-year physiotherapy degree and then for me to turn around and say, say do less. But I mean, that is literally it. You know, it is a case of pulling back the volume, pulling back the intensity, and then trying to gradually build it up over the course of subsequent weeks. Because, like, if you think about it, you think about the actual the forces that you're dealing with, let's say in running. And if you're normally doing your 5K at 5 minutes per kilometer, let's say a 25-minute run, and then what you say to yourself, you get some knee pain and you go online and you say, it's my mechanics, it's because I'm touching on the wrong part of my foot. And then what you do is you go out and you do another 5K at the same pace, and you just change slightly the way you run. Like, there's such a small difference in terms of the cumulative loading that your joints are dealing with versus initially reducing the volume and the intensity. Like, clearly that's a more potent reduction. Say if you're thinking of it in a weight training context, if your shoulder was sore, your shoulder was at you, you've injured your shoulder, and you're trying to reduce the dose of exercise, it would clearly be a far more effective reduction of dose to cut down from 10 sets to 5 sets at 5 reps in reserve versus continuing to do 10 sets but moving your grip out 1 inch. Clearly that's just fairly futile, and that is kind of the case here if you're focusing solely on those mechanical changes to address your pain with running. So bring down the volume initially, bring down the intensity, and also just remember or try to take the lesson away from how this onset in the first place. Because what sometimes happens is people will do this rapid increase in volume initially, where they go from doing 0 running to doing 4 10Ks a week as fast as they can. And then they'll listen and they'll say, okay, I'm going to pull back the intensity. I'm going to pull back the volume. I'm going to listen. And for the first 4 weeks, I'm going to gradually reintroduce, and you follow your rehab plan. But then what they do is they just go back to the old mindset, and they think that the goal is to get back to baseline and then do the same dumb programming again by just going as fast as you can for as long as you can again. And the whole point is that you should take the lessons away from being injured. No injury should ever be wasted. There should always be some sort of lesson involved. And if you have the opportunity to learn why you initially got to that place in the first place, you should allow that to inform your future practices. And that's just good training practices in general, to adopt an approach where my goal is not always to perform or to test. My goal is to train, and training for developing fitness characteristics is different to testing them all the time. So there should almost always be something left in the tank in the vast majority of the work that you do in training. That's not always the case. You could have some of your session that you're actually this is a testing component of the session, but 100% of your week and week across the month, they shouldn't all be testing you to your limits, because that is really a recipe for developing pain and injury over time. And ultimately how you address that prophylactically and reactively is to start to get away from that paradigm of as fast, as hard, as much all the time. So they're the vast majority of the things that I would be addressing in clients who present with these problems. Any questions?
Literally nothing to add, no questions to ask, because again, it's a fairly straightforward concept.
It is, yeah.
Ease into it if you're trying to be, smart. And then also, if you had an issue, ease out of it and then ease back into it.
Yep. Absolutely. And that really is it. Can it be more complicated sometimes? For sure. Of course it can. If you've got an Achilles tendinopathy, for example, like they're an annoying injury. I've had an Achilles tendinopathy myself, and I know they're annoying injuries. The same if you're dealing with some other tendinopathy. It could be patellar tendinopathy or tendonitis, as some will call it. Like, if you've got irritation of that tendon at the front of your knee, that can also be an annoying injury to deal with. And it might be the case that it's not just a case of very simple reintroduction of running. You might also have to do some resistance training and specific exercises to try to build up that tolerance in parallel with you doing your little bit of running rehab and stuff like that. And of course, like, it gets way more complicated if you have things like ACL reconstruction and rehab associated with that, etc. But fundamentally, regardless of the problem, the basic framework actually ends up being pretty much the same, and it is simply a case of pull back to what you can currently tolerate, and let's build up your capacity over time so that you're able to do the things that you need to be able to do. Like, that's rehab. That's it.
And obviously, like, if you were working with someone that actually had an issue, like, you can get way more specific. And obviously, this very generalized discussion about
sure.
Ease into it. Like, what that actually means
Yeah.
for you as an individual is obviously going to be different based on your exercise history, your injury history, what's actually going on right now. All of that stuff plays into it. So take it for what it is, right? Or take this discussion for what it is, which is just a generalized overview of like, this is how you should generally be thinking about dealing with issues like this.
Yep, 100%, guys. And remember, it can go beyond the knee. So if you have problems elsewhere, and with other activities, you can still absolutely try and apply these principles. And as much as, I think it's good to work with professionals, when trying to work through these problems, I also think that you can really, really start to empower yourself and your own training and activity decisions by just trying to apply some of these principles and having some of those heuristics in mind. Obviously, if it's the case that, hey, look, I've been trying to manage this myself for 12 weeks and I'm getting nowhere, maybe that's the time that you want to see a physiotherapist, or, if you're having problems with your programming, obviously you can guide your own programming through information we present at the podcast, but there comes a point where you're like, I'm getting nowhere. Maybe I should hire a personal trainer, those types of things. So,
Like you
so
should
yeah.
definitely have the goal of having the ability to perform basic body maintenance. And then
Yeah.
obviously the goal is also to have the ability to guide basic body adaptations. Like most people should be able to understand, how do you build muscle? How do you get fitter? Like the basic. And obviously that's going to work for quite a lot of people, but there's going to be situations where you're like, I want to get in my best shape ever. I want to get, cure this injury that I've had plaguing me for the last 2 months. Or, there's going to be certain times where dealing with a professional is required, I'd say,
Yeah.
and obviously you can also outsource everything, because that's obviously a service that we have in this wonderful first world country of ours, where you could literally just outsource all of the thinking and never have to think of any of that stuff again yourself. We don't generally recommend that, because again, we like people to be empowered with education. But again, it is a distinct possibility. Anyway, guys, where can people find us? What services do we offer? Tell me all that jazz.
Yeah, so as you guys will know, if you've been following on with the podcast, we are in the process of working on a lot of background content, and that background content is for a service that we call the Coach's Corner. And it's the Coach's Corner because it's dedicated to developing coaches or personal trainers, but also interested trainees. So if you're someone who wants to learn some of the applied subjects that are relevant to personal training in a way that is going to allow you to individualize for your clients, get them better results, and hopefully allow you to have a more successful business, then that is ultimately going to be the goal of the Coach's Corner. So you can pre-register your interest for that service below, and that will enable you to avail of a discount, significant discount, and there's no commitment involved in you pre-registering your interest. So you get a discount, and there's no loss involved there. So get involved. Along with that, we have the Triage Method community, which is our free open access Facebook group. And I say free open access, but technically not open access because you do have to request to join, but we will let you in. I promise. No discrimination. So join there, ask questions, see what we're posting. We are posting excerpts from the Coach's Corner content in there. So insights into what we will be releasing. And obviously that's going to be useful if you're someone who's considering the service or seeing, whether or not it might even be of interest to you. It might be of no interest to you, but you can still get the free information that we're releasing in the Facebook group. Along with that, you can also get that same information on our Triage Method newsletter, which is the email list. We do actually have people who are subscribed to the newsletter who don't actually use any other social media, which I found out recently because a few people emailed me after I made a video about social media and posted some stuff in the newsletter, and they were like, thank God for things like newsletters. I follow a few different businesses that put out useful stuff, and otherwise I don't use social media. So that was interesting. So I think maybe there's some of you who maybe listen to the podcast and are in a similar position, so you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that actually allows you to keep up with everything that we're producing across all platforms, along with recommended resources from around the internet. So I mean, if you don't want to use social media and see what people are up to, we're going to send you resources that we have found, whether they be research papers or podcasts or videos or whatever, that might be of interest to you, that are likely to be of interest to you if you follow us. And we'll also release, as I alluded to, excerpts from the Coach's Corner. So video snippets along with articles or slide excerpts and associated posts in there as well. So again, it's just free information. There's no loss involved there. And then obviously, guys, we do have online coaching available. So, if you've listened to this podcast and you're thinking, hey, I've been working through a bit of stubborn knee pain in my programming, when I do these exercises, I want to do this program up, that might be something that we'll be able to help with. So if you are interested in online coaching, then you can get involved. We do have spaces available. And I think that is pretty much everything, other than suggesting that you follow our social media, and in particular YouTube, because you'll be missing out otherwise. I don't classify YouTube as social media technically, although it's definitely just as addictive in some capacity. You know, I find myself watching meat and egg time lapses and stuff like that sometimes, and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Not very often,
Well,
but
if you didn't join, or you're not watching this on YouTube, you're not getting the full experience, because you don't get to
yes,
see Gary in a fucking beater over here as he records this fucking podcast.
yeah, exactly. You're not getting the full experience. Don't get to see my absolutely disastrous haircut after shaving my head. That's a good lesson, actually. Like, recognize that when you normally get haircuts, as a male, you know, you might think that your hair is like all the same length, more or less, but you actually don't realize, you know, your top's always way longer, especially if you're the type of person to get a fade. So then when you actually shave your whole head and it all grows back, and it grows back the same length or slightly different, it's like, oh man, the state of my head, you know. But
Just
yeah,
learn to cut your own hair effectively. It's not that hard.
it doesn't seem to be working very well.
I told you I would have given you a haircut when you were up, but you were like, no.
That's because they open on the 29th of June. I'm ready. Same day as the gym. I'm going to be strolling into the gym. Fresh fade. But yeah, no, that's it, guys. Subscribe to the podcast as well. It does really help.
Especially on
Um,
Spotify.
especially on Spotify. Subscribe and share it around too. You know, if you're on the old socials and you do the whole Instagram story thing, say, hey, listen to this podcast. It's absolutely amazing. Love both of the guys. Or hate both of them. They're so annoying, which is why you should listen. You know, we allow for that too. Share it around.
Anyway, I have nothing else to say, Gary, so I'm going to wrap this up here. And again, it is too easy.
Too easy.